Grade 12 students. This presentation focuses on Part 2, Grade 12 History, Unit 1, Unit 2, Part 2, the Partition of Africa, Motives and Process. By the way, don't miss subscribing, sharing this video, okay? And this is the presentation in English. I will just be joining you with the same topic in Amharic next time. For now, let me explain to you the partition of Africa, motives and process. On the eve of days or times before the start of European scramble for Africa, that means Western Europe had conducted the Industrial Revolution for a century, and had for a century meaning for 100 years, and had clearly become the most powerful and technologically advanced continent in the world, right, following the Industrial Revolution, especially Britain, followed by the rest of Europe, like France, Germany, had conducted this revolution for the coming 100 years, and had clearly become the most powerful and technologically advanced continent in the world. Yeah. Firearms, transportation, communication technologies were developing very quickly, right? Nation pride was growing in each European country, every nation trying to have a strong national state or nation state. It was a time for building up their national state, like the case of Germany and Italy. Furthermore, advances in medicine have enabled Europeans to spend longer periods in the tropics free of illness. So those problems in the tropical Africa that is attached with a kind of as a fly, a mosquito, all these have got a cure because of their European advance in medicine. An economic decline in the early 1870s pushed some Europeans to look toward the industrial world, like Africa, especially the African countries. They viewed these countries as both markets, centers of markets for their finished products, commodities, items, and suppliers of natural resource to fuel their industries. Africa became a center for their markets, for their finished goods. That means they were highly in need of markets for their finished goods, and to Africa to be the most important supplier of natural resource like minerals for their industries. In addition, the strongest European countries began to fear what would happen to the balance of power if their rivals acquire colonies in Africa, one competing the other, There was a sense of frustration among them. All of this resulted in the scramble for Africa, right? The zeal, their interest to acquire colonies in Africa, every colony except Austria and Russia, the remaining 7 European countries came to Africa. They became competent rival colonial powers. So there was a problem, and that problem was competition. So as a result, all of this resulted in the scramble for Africa. They were coming to how to scramble for Africa. they could just bring about strategies for this frustration, for this fear or competition, a fear caused by competition. It began with a slow territorial acquisition, meaning control, through the early 1880s and was followed by a competitive rush to claim African lands after the Berlin Conference. Very clear. Competitive followed by competitive rush. Competitive rush meaning there was a sense of competition, a rivalry, and there was a rush, the interest to move into, to encroach into the mainland of Africa because of her position as an industrial nation in the world. Britain dominated Africa's external trade until the second half of the 19th century, until this period, second half of meaning until the 1850. She produced industrial goods, exported them to Africa using her largest merchant navy, right? This provided her with an opportunity to establish trading stations, occupy bases and coastal colonies on the continent. So she was among the first, besides France, and even the leading great power, big power of Europe to come to Africa with a huge amount of capital to invest in Africa. As their home markets became saturated, enough of European markets were not. That means European markets were not enough for selling British goods. If its target, the British target was Europe, that became a problem. It became saturated, full. These powers turned to Africa to sell their manufactured goods. So as long as there was saturation of markets in Europe, they had to look for other means. That was Africa. Okay, they preferred Africa to sell their finished goods. As a result, protectionism was encouraged more than free trade. There had been free trade, a sense of implementation of free trade earlier, but that was not encouraged. So what came was protectionism, giving protection to European companies. This in turn increased the desire of the new industrial powers, while Britain, France, Belgium, these three, okay, while Britain, France, and Belgium were advancing their armies into Africa, Germany was waiting for its time. Okay, they would be becoming four when Germany was to be included in this group. In 1884, Bismarck declared a German protectorate over 3 African territories, namely Togoland. These are, assume this is West Africa. Okay, Togoland you have here around, and Cameroon here, and Southwest Africa here. Here is Southwest Africa, what's called today Namibia, present-day Namibia. He then invited the major European powers to Berlin. Germany became a host nation. The stated goals of the conference were, the aims of the conference were to be the settlement of Congo claims between Britain, France, and Portugal, and the Anglo-French rivalries along the Niger River. These powers, Britain, France, and Portugal, were coming to control Congo. This is Congo, what's called today DRC. And the Anglo-French rivalries here is the Niger River, along the Niger River. Anglo-French rivalry, meaning Anglo stands for referring to Britain, French as France. European powers recognized that rules were needed for controlling African territories, especially for seizures that held the potential for European conflict. Rules, meaning these were grounded rules, ground rules, basic ones. Every rival power should respect for. The Berlin Conference was held in Berlin, capital of Germany, that means, from November 1884 to February 1885. It was Bismarck, the Chancellor, as you know it well, Chancellor meaning Prime Minister of Germany, who initiated, motivated, and inspired other European powers to come to the conference, who initiated the conference. The conference was an attempt by European leaders to add international agreements, to the carving up of Africa that was already underway, already carving Africa or partitioning Africa into their own sphere of influence. Every European power had already announced its claim, where German claim was, where British claim was, territorial claim, where the French claim was, it was already known. Plus, this was an addition to add international agreement, to frame it with a fixed agreement, rules. It involved the representatives of 13 European countries, including Germany, the host nation. The European states were Britain, Germany, France, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Belgium, Holland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Denmark, and Sweden. Actually, I have mentioned these two earlier. They didn't take any land, especially in Africa. We'll see. Okay? In fact, the Ottoman Empire, which had been thoroughly, completely weakened and lost most of its former territories, was not represented in the Berlin Conference. Okay, Ottoman Turkey was not summoned, invited. Although the main agenda in the Berlin Conference was Africa, no African country, including Ethiopia and Liberia, was invited to take part in the conference, including the sovereign countries, independent nations, Ethiopia and Liberia. All African territories, countries were not invited in the conference to take part in the conference. By the time the conference ended, King Leopold of Belgium had secured ownership of the Congo Free State, what's called today DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, and the conference recognized Leopold's so-called international association as the legitimate authority in the Congo Basin. Okay, actually, Congo Free State was not Belgian colony. Rather, it was a private colony, privately owned by King Leopold of Belgium. Therefore, the Berlin Conference gave recognition to Leopold's international accession as the legitimate authority, meaning all the rest, Britain, France, every country of the European continent who wished to have colonies in Africa gave recognition to King Leopold. In return, the Belgian Belgian king agreed to allow European traders and merchants free access to the area, okay, even to the extent of having a free trade in Congo, okay, which means that the French, the British, Austrian, or any Portuguese, any Spanish merchants could freely exchange or sell and buy commodities, a free area, meaning that the king agreed, and even to navigate, to use the river Zaire to navigate, a free river for all Europeans to be navigated. Based on the Berlin negotiations, negotiations meaning agreements, Leopold proclaimed his own personal kingdom, the Congo Free State. The formal name for what is called today DRC was that time Congo Free State. Free State belonged to the individual King Leopold, not to his country, Belgium. France got acceptance of its claims to the French Congo as well. French Congo, there were two Congos, and what's called Central African Republic today. French Congo, there were two Congos. French Congo is under the French, and the other Congo under King Leopold. Portugal lost most of its Congo claims. She had been the old master, lord of that territory, Congo. So Portugal lost. And European powers recognized Germany's new protectorates. This is another growing power, colonial power, Germany. The European nations declared free trade along the Congo Basin, as I said, and free navigation on not only on the Congo River, but also Niger River that had fallen into the hands of the French. The French here allowed the Niger River to be navigated freely by anyone among the European navigators. The European colonial powers also consolidated their role in the areas they already occupied and set out rules to occupy additional new territories. They set out rules. Everybody should obey these rules. Any colonial power should accept these rules, and therefore they set out rules in order to consolidate their rule in the areas of Africa. Nevertheless, the most significant of these rules, however, the most significant of these rules or General Act of Berlin was Article 36. Article 36. It stated that colonial powers were obligated to notify each other when they claimed Africa. Okay, one African country, let's say, if for instance, or when one great power of Europe wished to control any territory in Africa, what is expected, for instance, Tanzania today, okay, claimed by Germany, she had to announce. She was forced to announce, to notify, to the rest of the colonial powers. That was one important agreement stated in Article 36. Okay, if there was a British claim over part of African territory, okay, she had to notify, announce, declare that this territory was about to be controlled by Britain. This means that what the implication is just to avoid bloody wars among European powers. Okay, to partition, to scramble for Africa, by avoiding bloody wars among themselves. Furthermore, you see, in addition, subsequent effective occupation of the claimed area was necessary for the claim to remain valid, to get validity, okay, to make it real, okay. In the subsequent times, European powers tried to bring about effective occupation of the claimed area was necessary, the most important. Effective occupation, meaning a complete domination by that European power over a specific area of the continent of Africa. Effective occupation was expected. African resistance against colonial expansion. You see, Europeans, as we did discuss, Europeans encroached or came into the mainland of Africa, controlled territories. What became the response from Africans, from the chiefs, local kings, from kings, emperors, and from the native people? And here we're to identify, we're expected to know the meaning, the definition of these words, what colonialism is, resistance, scorched earth policy. This policy, we'll see, okay, devastating enemy land, enemy property. Are they all using a proper, full, strong military power? A European power having a strong military force, devastating African village, scorched earth policy, up until they could control African territories and made them their colonies. There was a policy called scorched earth policy, to the extent of devastating Africa. What their goal was to make Africa their colony. African initiatives and response to colonialism. Yeah, what inspired, what initiated Africans to start against colonialism and African response to colonialism. We're going to see this in detail. The Africans did not welcome the European colonizers who were uninvited guests in Africa. They were not invited totally, but they came in. They were not welcomed by Africans. The Africans attempted to resist the European colonizers as much as they could. So as much as they could be okay with this problem they had. Many problems Africans did have. With those problems, they attempted to resist European colonizers, which was better than silence. The colonial powers employed different methods to colonize Africa. They used fake treaties. I have mentioned this case. Okay, they approached African chiefs friendly, as if they were friends to the local king, to the kings of Africa. And then they bring about treaties which were fake, deceiving, cheating African chiefs. Sometimes even, European governments try to give loans to African chiefs or landowners. They gave loans to be returned back. And when African natives failed to pay back those loans, those debts, finally they were just forced to sell their land, okay, to pass their land to the loan givers, to the Europeans. These were the system, okay, including fake treaties. that was used by Europeans to extend their control of the continent. When treaties failed to bring them what they wanted, the European colonizers resorted to use of sort the use of force, their final mechanism, strategy. Okay. The Africans, on the other hand, reacted to the colonial aggression in two ways. Okay, how they resisted colonial aggressors. The African reaction to colonial rule included both peaceful and violent methods. Peacefully, okay, they never, in some places, they never reacted forcibly. Rather, in a peaceful method, they want to react their resistance, opposition to colonialism, and partly there were violent methods with having just an armed force. Practically, the African society resisted the colonizers using any means, and there was resistance in almost every region of European advance. Where there were European whites, colonizers in Africa, the degree might differ, but there was resistance, breaking their silence. But there were differences in the intensity of resistance from one region to another. Okay, the African resistance had a clear ideological basis. That is, the resistance was an attempt to safeguard their sovereignty. Africans knew that their resistance had a clear ideological basis, meaning that to bring about, to keep up their sovereign state, to safeguard their sovereignty, their independence. Okay, I advise you to go into these points in group. Okay, try to solve this, discuss anyways. Okay, among we can divide even the African resistance to colonial rule as early African resistance between the two world wars, the second phase, like from 1918 to like 50s. Goes up that, and the third one, for independence period, resistance for independence, especially after the Second World War. Okay, among those African rulers who came up with, we can group him in the early resistance movement. We call him Samori Toure of Mandinka. Samori Toure. He was a Muslim religious figure and a military leader who managed to control the essential Douala trading post of Kankan, found on the upper Milo River. He was the one in what's called like, his empire included like Guinea, Mali, okay, parts of Senegal, like that, Niger area. He was a known emperor, notable emperor. By 1881, the territorial size of the Wasolo Empire was enlarged and included parts of present-day Guinea, Mali, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire. The French attempt to expand in West Africa in the late 1870s, late meaning, to make it clear, early 1870s, if it was, like 1872, 73, like that, early. Late meaning 1878, 79, brought them into direct conflict with Samori Toure. The French interest attempt to expand in West Africa collided them. Their interest became a cause for the conflict with Samori Toure. The French were expanded towards the territories occupied by Samori's empire called Wasolo Empire, which otherwise was, the empire of Mali. Frequently you have learned it in grade 9. even in grade 11. Mali Empire. He was the king of the emperor of Wasulu Empire. In early 1882, French force launched an attack against Samory's force. His force successfully repulsed, repulsed meaning pushing back. He defeated them. The French attacked and retained their possession there. He controlled all the territories that had been under the control of or in the hands of the French colonizers. In this battle, Samurai Ture was surprised by the military discipline and quality of firearms, which he got used to get these firearms he got from the nearby coastal people. He used to buy those firearms earlier. Ture wanted to have, his interest was to have well-trained, disciplined, properly armed troops, properly equipped, that means troops like the French soldiers. To create an efficient modern army, Samurai Ture sought meaning that past of sick needs, wants, that means past of sick, South European assistance. He wanted European to make his army modern. Okay, in January 1885, he sent envoys. He wanted attachment with the British colonial rulers. That means he sent envoys, messengers, people, some notable figures to British colonial rulers in Freetown, Sierra Leone, promising to place his empire under British protection. He was about to pass his territory to the British, meaning that Britain to protect. We will discuss Britain was not like the French. They used indirect rule. Rather, what they want was monopolizing the local kings as of their interest. The British were unwilling, not interested to confront the French by accepting Samory's request. You know, Samory, what he did was just his land was about to be taken by the French. The British were outside of Freetown, Sierra Leone, nearby British colonies, the war. So he wanted to approach to make an ally, to make Britain the ally of Samory, his own ally. That means the British should be on his side. If they were on his side, they have to confront the French. But here it says the British were unwilling, not interested to confront the French by accepting Samory's request, but agreed to sell modern weapons. The British wanted to sell their weapons to Samory. The French troops launched a military expedition in 1885 to control the Bure-rich gold mines. What they like was minerals, as we have discussed frequently. Samory's better armored force successfully resisted. Oh, how he was great. Okay, a strong emperor. The French attacked and launched a successful three-directional counter-offensive. Counter-offensive meaning anti of the French attack. He reacted to the French offensive, expelling the French force from Bore. He was able to just push back the French from Bore, the gold mine, as we have discussed. Samory's army was well organized, divided into infantry meaning ground force, ground army, and cavalry units, meaning using the horsebacks. Cavalry units, horsebacks, cavalry. In March 1891, the French launched a military offensive. This is almost the third phase against Samori in eastern Guinea. Although Samori's force scored victories in some battles, they couldn't totally expel the French. The Samori's force army was in some battle areas, in some battlefields. His force scored a little, but impossible for his force to totally expel or defeat and push back the French terror. In June 1892, the French defeated Samori's force and captured the capital Bisandugu, okay, the capital of Samori, that means. The British then refused to sell firearms and ammunition to Samori, okay. They broke their promise they decided to stop or refused to stop selling firearms and ammunition to Samori. As a last resort, Samori formed an anti-colonial coalition as a solution, a last solution, a resort solution. Samori formed an anti-colonial coalition with a neighboring Ashanti Empire, okay, what's called Ashanti Empire, okay, the nearby. The alliance failed as British troops defeated the Ashanti Empire in 1897. The Ashanti meaning the present-day Ghana. In 1898, Samori lost almost all his territory to the French and was forced to retreat. He submitted, almost surrendered. Instead of giving his hands totally, he retreated back. On September 29, 1890, Samori surrendered to the French and was exiled to Gabon. Another French, Gabon was here around. Another French, nearer to Angola, French colony. Okay, he was exiled there, and it was in Gabon. He died on June 2, 1900, meaning that his empire, West Africa, came under the direct control of the French. And even we'll see the Ashanti fell in the hands of the British as well, almost same time. The attempts made by Africans to stop European colonization was not successful, partly because African resistance were not well organized. Not well, partly. There were many other factors, like not having modern arms, modern weapons, and there was no unity among Africans. So this was partly a reason for African resistance to have failed, because they were not well organized. Europeans had marked superiority in military training, in military training and firearms. They had more trained soldiers and plus advanced weapons, advanced firearms. Sometimes Europeans mobilized Africans against fellow Africans determined to fight them. Okay, this was the British plan, another policy in addition to their indirect policy. They used what was called a divide and rule system. Okay, they divided Africans. Some Africans gone to the British side. Some Africans stood for their freedom. So Africans fighting Africans. That was more advantageous for European colonizers. This was the system they used. The only successful anti-colonial struggle in Africa was that of Ethiopia. You remember the Battle of Adwa, the victory of Ethiopians at Adwa over the Ethiopians under Menelik. Defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in 1890, maintaining recognized independence. We know our national history. You clearly understood it. The Ashanti, what's called today Ghana. Ghana. Here is Ghana. Okay, Ghana. By the way, don't be confused. Here there was also ancient Ghana. Okay, far from. This was even the nucleus, the ancient site for what was called in the later times an empire controlled by Samory Toure. The earliest state was the ancient Ghanaian Empire. This one was modern Ghana, okay, the land of Kwame Nkrumah. The Ashanti Empire was a pre-colonial West African state emerged in the 17th century. In present-day Ghana, the Ashanti or Asante were an ethnic subgroup of the Akan-speaking people composed of small chiefdoms. There were small chiefdoms merged or bring about a sort of people, a subgroup within the Ashanti, okay, within the Akan-speaking people, and we call them the Ashanti people or Asante. The Ashanti established their state around Kumasi in the late 1600s, meaning 1680s, 1690s, like that. Okay, sorry. Shortly after their first contact with Europeans, they began to have contacts around this time. The empire grew partly out of wars and dislocations caused by Europeans seeking control over gold deposit in the Gold Coast region. Ashanti, mainly Gold Coast, was known by its gold deposits, and that was the British target. Especially Britain targeted these gold deposits in the Gold Coast. During this era, the Portuguese were the most active Europeans in West Africa, right? Clear. They made the Ashanti significant trading partners, providing walls and weapons that allowed the state to grow stronger than neighbors. Earlier, the Portuguese were the first to have landed around this west of Morocco, coastal part of Atlantic Ocean, okay? They had trading stations around here, so they were about to come here, okay? They claimed they sold weapons for the gold of the Ashanti, the Gold Coast. Even Gold Coast was a part of the coastal part of what's called today Ghana. For its richness, wealth in gold, that area was called the Gold Coast. We have said this, providing wealth, weapons, we have said this. Providing wealth and weapons that allowed the state to grow stronger than Ghanaian neighbors, than the neighbors around here. Okay, Ghana became a superpower, a strong state around there. In the 18th century, Ashanti was one of the Akan-speaking Portuguese trading partners. We said this. This changed when Osei Tutu, Ashanten meaning paramount, notable chief, notable chief from 1701 to 1717, and his priest Komfo Anokie, hard actually to catch up the words, it might be hard for you, difficult. Komfo Anokie, try to catch up. Unified the independent chiefdoms into the most powerful political and military state in the coastal areas. What it says is within from this to this, okay, this situation, this trading partnership with the Portuguese changed the mentality of Osa, the Ashanti, the king, the local chief, called Osei Tutu. The partnership brought a change in the mentality of Osei Tutu from this to this, and his priest, Komfo Anokie, unified the independent chiefdoms into the most powerful political. So this Ashantian, together with this priest, came together and brought a kind of unified state, independent chiefdoms, actually unified. You see, there were independent chiefdoms. Osei Tutu had his own independent chiefdom. Komfo, the priest, had his own independent chiefdoms. These two independent chiefdoms came into one, unified. They became one into the most powerful political and military state in the coastal region around here, that means here around. The Ashantian organized the Asante Union, Association, an alliance of Akan-speaking people loyal to his central authority. He organized this union among the Akan-speaking people. Kumasi became the capital, capital of the Ashanti, the unified state, the capital of the unified state called Kumasi, the capital. He created a constitution. You know what constitution? It could be a written or unwritten document. Anyways, a constitution that the country should be guided by, centralized the military, founded the Odiwira festival symbolizing the unity. The Ghanaians were known by a kind of dancing system, that is the festival, Odiwira festival. Most importantly, he created the golden stool. He created the golden stool representing the ancestors of all Ashanti. The dead ones. On behalf of the dead people, representing them, he created the golden stool. This legitimized his role and the royal dynasty, welcomed and accepted by his people once he had created the golden stool. Gold was the major product of the Ashanti Empire, right? Osei Tutu made gold mines, royal possessions, and gold dust the circulating currency. He used gold, the gold mines, as his own possessions, royal possessions, plus the gold dust as the circulating currency. Gold dust was accumulated by citizens, especially wealthy merchants. The economy depended on gold trade in the 1700s, but by the early 1880s, meaning that 1810s, 1820s, that is, the Ashanti became major exporters of enslaved people. Amazing. Enslaved people, exporting them, selling them, receiving luxury items and firearms in exchange, which was, we call it barter system, bartering, exchanging goods for goods. So he gave the enslaved people as slaves, and in exchange he received luxury items and firearms, weapons. The consequence was terrible, very terrifying, problematic. From 1790 to 1896, the Ashanti were in continuous war, acquiring slaves for trade. One of The causes or the factors for acquiring slaves was war, continuous war, okay, to get war captives. And those war captives became slaves. And they could be just exchanged for shining materials coming from Europe. And those slaves were taken to America. Constant warfare weakened them against the British, their main enemy. Constant warfare weakened them against them while fighting with the British. They had a weakened stand. Their enemy was Britain. Between 1823 and 1873, the Ashanti resisted British advance in the earlier stage. Yeah, they were successful. In 1874, however, British force invaded and briefly captured Kumasi, the capital of, especially what's called the Ashanti Empire, especially in the south, what in the future we call it Gold Coast. The Ashanti rebelled. They stood against the British colonizers, rebelled. But the empire was conquered in 1897. Even though the Ashanti resisted, they were unable to repulse or to push back the British conquerors, and they failed. Their empire failed or was conquered by the British in 1897. After another uprising, another revolt, okay, rebellion against the British in 1900, after the last one it was, the British withdrew and exiled the Ashanti. Okay, the British overthrew. Not withdrew, sorry. The British overthrew, toppled down, and exiled the Ashanti to leave the territory and annexed the Ashanti Empire into the Gold Coast colony in 1902, almost. And within a short time, the British as well penetrated into the mainland of Ghana, what's called today Ghana, and the whole Ghana became the colony of Britain. Urabi Pasha's rebellion in Egypt, clearly known that Egypt was claimed by Britain, as well as even by the French. Okay, we'll see. Let's see their history. Ahmed Urabi or Urabi Pasha, a title name given from the Turks to the local chief, to the military of the Egyptians, because frequently Egypt had been under the control of the Ottoman Turks, was an Egyptian army of terror who participated in an 1879 mutiny that developed into the Urabi revolt against Khedive Tawfik's administration under Anglo-French influence. This was the one who succeeded Khedive Ismail Pasha. You know, Khedive Ismail Pasha was the leader of, the ruler of Egypt at the time when Egyptians attacked Ethiopia at the time of the reign of Emperor Johannes IV. He was promoted to Tawfiq cabinet and began the reforms. Urabi became part of the cabinet, that means. But demonstrations in Alexandria in 1882 led to British bombardment and occupation of Egypt. Urabi and his supporters were arrested and exiled to Ceylon, Sri Lanka. The revolt was inspired by Urabi plus his supporters were arrested, detained, and finally exiled, left Egypt. The revolt was inspired by Urabi's interest for social justice and equal standing before the law, everybody to be treated as of the law. Supported by peasants, he aimed to free Egypt and Sudan from foreign control and in the absolutist regime of Khedive Ismail Pasha. Okay. It was this time up until some days, up until 1879, Khedive Ismail Pasha himself died in 1879. I know that. So what Urabi interested in was just mobilizing the peasants of Egypt, to make his land, his country free. Not only his country, south of Egypt, we have Sudan, both to be free from foreign control, including British control, and in the absolutist regime of Khedive Ismail Pasha. Meaning that he had enemies, we can say. One was the local king, Khedive Ismail Pasha, and the foreign power, Britain. He stood against both. The revolt also expressed resentment, hatred, opposition, that means resentment, hatred, at foreign and Ottoman aristocratic influence. Even he never wants to, the revolt maker, leaders do not want to see any foreign and Ottoman aristocratic influence. They want to make Egypt free of Ottoman aristocratic influence. Urabi was captured, tried for rebellion on December 3, 1882, sentenced to death, but committed to life banishment. He left Egypt on December 28, 1882. This marked the direct control of Egypt under or by Britain, 1882. In May 1901, Khedive Abbas II, Khedive was a title name as well given like Pasha. Pasha to the military, Khedive to the ruler, Khedive, a title name like we used to call Nugus in Ethiopia. Khedive Abbas II allowed Urabi to return. Abbas opposed British influence. Okay, Urabi remained in Egypt until his days in 1911. He came back. He was released from prison, I think. Urabi's revolt is significant as Egypt's first nationalist movement, a movement that mobilized the peasants against the British colonizers, laying the foundation for mass politics. Later, under Gamal Abdel Nasser, Urabi was celebrated as a patriot and national hero. The moment Gamal Abdel Nasser came to power by toppling King Farouk, he came to power and even driven out the British colonizers from the soil of Egypt. Nasser, announced Urabi to have a day of celebrity as a patriot and national hero in Egyptian history. The Mahdist movement, this was very amazing history of Africa, part of African history. Mahdist movement in the Sudan, which was a religious movement at the beginning, the Mahdist rebellion meaning mob, revolt, we can say, rebellion, revolt, movement, we can say, began in 1881, led by Muhammad Ahmed, a Muslim holyman from Dongola who declared himself the expected Mahdi, Islamic savior or Islamic leader, savior. On August 12, 1881, Al-Mahdi won his first victory at the Battle of Abba. Al-Mahdi, he got his first victory. In November 1883, Mahdi won another victory, meaning at first, the movement was the Islamic revivalist movement targeting Islam, for pure Islam, realistic, practical Islam. But later on, when Egyptians attacked the Sudan, This movement turned to anti-colonial movement, anti-colonial rebellion that targeted the Egyptians. So they won. They won the Egyptians. This was the victory of Al-Mahdi, the first victory of Al-Mahdi over the Egyptian, the Battle of Abba. In November 1883, Mahdis won another victory over the the British. Once they controlled Egypt in 1882, every concern of Egypt became the concern of Britain. Therefore, they joined their army and formed Anglo-Egyptian army in Cordovan province. Okay, they lost. They lost this battle. The Mahdis won, defeated the Anglo-Egyptian army. You will learn in Ethiopian history how this situation invited Emperor Ioannis to have involved in such a bad military condition, and the Mahdist even stood against Ioannis and even killed him at the Battle of Matama. You learn this. In 1885, Al-Mahdi's force captured Khartoum, killed Charles Gordon Pasha, the general, army commander of the British Army. Muhammad Ahmed died 5 minutes later, okay? The Mahdi, that means. The Mahdis were also called Dervish and later Ansars. These were the Ansars who came to invade Ethiopia. To attack the force of, even devastated the church of Gondar, devastated the area, the towns, even enslaved people, converted the Christians into Islam. Ansars, a branch, a contingent, a regiment within the Mahdist force. We call them Dervish, or later called Ansars. After the Mahdist days, Caliph Abdullah led establishing a strong administration with direct district governors collecting tax per Quranic law. The Quranic law. Quran, you know it. Quran, according to the law, according each of the Quranic law, just tax were began to be collected. The British saw the Mahdist victories as a threat and sought to avenge Gordon's death. Gordon was their military army commander who joined the army of the Egyptians, but defeated by the Mahdists, finally lost his life. He was killed, murdered by the Mahdists. So to avenge that, they considered that Mahdist victory as a threat. So they sought to avenge Gordon's death, to avenge the Mahdists. In 1896, the Anglo-Egyptian army, the two combined force under another military commander called General Kitchener, advanced into Sudan. In 1898, this Anglo-Egyptian army defeated the Mahdists at the Battle of Omdurman, and this marked the end of Mahdist movement, rebellion, and Sudan became a British colony from 1896 to up until 1956. She got independence in 1956. The same too, Egypt. Egypt became a British colony from 1882 to 1956. Both gained independence. Big error. 56. Both achieved their independence same time, 1956. The other is the Maji rebellion in East Africa. The most serious challenge for the Germans was the widespread resistance of the people of Tanganyika, meaning that the mainland of present-day Tanzania, the country, the land of Julius Nyerere. We can assume this here around. The coastal part was called Zanzibar, the coastal part. The mainland was called Tanganyika. This rebellion broke out in the southern part of the colony in the hinterland of Kilwa in July 1905. Try to answer this, compare and contrast the cause outcomes of the Maji Maji. Do it by yourself. Even you can discuss with your mates, with your friends. It began in the Matumbi Hills in Tanganyika, in the Matumbi Hills, following the imposition of heavy tax and the use of forced labor in cotton growing farms for export. Those cotton farms, plantation farms were owned by German merchants, German people, German colonizers. The revolt spread rapidly throughout the region with attacks on all foreigners, missionaries, administrators, and their Swahili Arab clerics. One information I want to share you is Swahili is a language mixed up from the native African language Bantu. Here, Bantu is widely spoken in this area, and mixed up with Arabic language, and these two gives you Swahili. Because around 14th, before the Portuguese came to this coastal area, the Arab merchants had visited this area, and there was even a blood mix with the native Bantu people. It was spontaneous revolt, not planned, spontaneous, or just immediately something exploded, a revolt with no previous planning or central leadership. Yet, still, the peoples of southern Tanzania came together uniquely in African resistance history. Instinctively, they turned to benefits in the spirit of world powers. They sprinkled their bodies with magic water known as maji maji. This is a Swahili word, maji maji. If sprinkled, what's the priests told to them was that this water could divert the German bullets, believed to turn enemy bullets into water. The resistance movement took its name from this term, but as a result, this magic couldn't just divert the German bullets. Rather, the bullets killed them in thousands. Thousands of Tanganyikans lost their lives, and they were actually cheated. Cheated in a sense that it was just important to inspire the people to stand for their freedom, but in the end, that brought a kind of disaster to Tanganyikan people. Although the revolt spread to Morogoro and the outskirts of Dar es Salaam, outskirts meaning surroundings, nearby, around, that means the surroundings of Dar es Salaam, what's called the capital city of present-day Tanzania. It gradually lost momentum. It became powerless. Weakened. The power of Maji Maji weakened, and political unity fell apart. Due to ethnic and other difference among the people of Tanganyika, ethnic difference. That was the problem most African people suffering from, ethnic difference, bad, the worst. By the end of 1905, the Germans brought reinforcements, obligatory, a mandatory rule, recruited from Somaliland and New Guinea. In 1906, they gradually reclaimed the Central Highland region. The Germans pursued a scorched earth policy. I have discussed to you, explain to you, devastating. You see, this is destroying village, laying waste to vast stretches of southern and central Tanzania, nothing left. They devastated, fired, destroyed the village of the people, beyond the killings of the people. Okay, they turned the village into west, to okay, in southern and central Tanzania. Okay, here what is important, Germans brought reinforcements recruited from Somaliland and New Guinea. There were recruited soldiers involved in the German army, and they claimed the central highland region of Tanganyika. Anyway, they followed this policy and devastated Tanganyika. Finally, they defeated the powerful Ngoni warriors in 1907, Ngoni fighters, independence fighters. The war devastated many African villages and brought famine. It also destroyed trade and wealth in the country. The Maji Maji revolt demonstrated the possibility of broader African anti-colonial nationalism. The sacrifice of thousands of Tanzanians inspired later nationalists who came years after to standing for their freedom, who led the country to independence in the 1960s. This included Julius Nyerere, actually. It was a background history, a motivational events. Okay, the Maji Maji revolts was kind of a basic factor for that inspiring the Tanzanian freedom fighters to come up or to stand for their national independence. Actually, she got its independence. Okay, the first Zanzibar, 63, and mainland Tanganyika in 1964. And it was in 1964 the two unified together and became independent Tanzania under Nyerere, Julius Nyerere. Okay, it's very vast. Let me stop here and we'll continue with the next part 3. That is 2.3, colonial administration and the colonial states, the kind of policies Britain and France used in Africa. And that is all about. This is part 2. I'll be joining you with part 3 next time. And don't forget, please subscribe and share my video. That's all about. Thanks a lot for your patience.